Our OTA this week has 9 card changes in it, 3 nerfs, and 6 buffs. Let's go ahead and dig on into the details, shall we? Second Inner kicks things off by acknowledging that Ahrim was a huge metagame shakeup, going on to say that its play rate hit an absolutely unprecedented level in Marvel Snap's history. They then go on to articulate, though, that Ahrim's win rate was not out of line despite its incredible play rate. This is reflective of my own personal experience against the card. While it was obviously incredibly popular, I felt like I was competitive into it with a wide variety of things, and I've had good win rates with a lot of different 12 card decks into these 24 card monstrosities. Ahrim's play rate is almost assuredly related to the fact that while it's competitive, it's super novel and people wanted to try something that was a truly new Marvel Snap experience. Second Inner goes on to say that while they're not adjusting Ahrim directly, it should be noted that Cassandra Nova is going to be an upcoming card release later this month that will give players another tool outside of Darkhawk to attack Ahrim decks directly. But they're also going to be toning down a couple of cards that have been more common in some of the more popular Ahrim variations to hopefully diversify what that archetype is looking to do overall. The first of these changes is Blob is losing his ongoing ability. While the inability to be moved was always a fairly nominal part of Blob's kit, and arguably he's better in a number of key situations since he's now no longer guaranteed to be destroyed by Cannonball, removing this ongoing does have one really big impact. A lot of the more popular Ahrim decks have taken to playing Mystique as a way to copy Blob's effect and effectively generate a 3/15 on the last turn of the game. Since Blob is no longer ongoing, this will no longer be an option. This also means, in terms of counterplay, Rogue, which had been an increasingly popular tech card to grab your opponent's Blob and then trigger a big card for yourself, is no longer counterplay into what Blob has going on. Overall, I think this change makes a lot of sense. While the ongoing effect on Blob made sense from a flavor perspective, it served to make the text box of this card longer when it already wasn't brief, and it added this powerful synergy with Mystique that absolutely isn't necessary to be there and serves only to make the Ahrim decks playing it a bit more powerful and consistent. Our next change to Ahrim adjacent cards comes to Mockingbird, who's going from a 5/9 up to a 6/10 while retaining her same text box of costing 1 less for each card in play that didn't start in your deck. Second Inner starts by acknowledging that Mockingbird has been around the top of the metagame since she released, and they go on to say that the addition of Ahrim to the game feels like it has pushed her up over the top. Personally, I'm really excited that they decided to go with a 6/10 Mockingbird as opposed to simply making her a 5/8. This change definitely quantifies as more of a side grade as opposed to a strict downgrade. She'll have an extra point of power in key spots where the extra energy may or may not matter, and this 10th point of power is an important breakpoint that now allows her to be an enabler for Scar. Specifically, both Mockingbird and Sasquatch work with Mysterio, and now both those cards work with Scar, giving us a potentially brand new way to build around that card. Our last nerf is another one that's not too surprising to me. Ravona is being reduced from a 2/3 down to a 2/2. She's definitely one of the best cost reducers in the game, and Second Dinner acknowledges the fact that her being a cost reducer has made their balancing job a little bit more difficult, since reducing the stat lines of anything to 1 or 0 can actually be a buff in a number of edge cases. I think she'll still be readily played in all of the decks that currently play her with this change, and she's technically marginally better now post Mr. Negative being a 2/2 when drawn out of your deck as opposed to a 3/2. One of my personal favorite cards that has long been unplayable is getting a much needed text box update in Viper. She will be remaining a 3/5 with her on reveal effect changing to one of your other cards here with the lowest power switches sides. Second Dinner acknowledges that Viper needs a specific game state to do her thing, and other cards that junk up the opponent's board can often make her life difficult. They're essentially making it so now when you play Viper in the mid to late game, she is guaranteed to hit the card that you most want her to hit in a given lane. While I personally will miss getting to crack jokes about how well trained my Viper is when she randomly hits the card I most wanted her to hit, this is a big upgrade for her effect, and I'm going to be interested to see if it's enough to make her playable again. I, for one, will certainly be testing Hood Viper, as it was long been a favorite of mine. Our second text box update in the OTA this week is a simple but powerful change. Lockjaw is losing a point of power, now making them a 4/4, but the once per turn restriction is being removed from the card, meaning you can play out as many cards as possible into Lockjaw's lane in a single turn, cycling them all in and out of your deck. I absolutely love this change. Second Dinner acknowledged that Lockjaw has been trouble keeping spots in decks since moving to a 4-cost. In fact, my personal favorite Thor Hammers deck was playing Blink, but explicitly not Lockjaw, just because of how clunky the card is. I think this is a big upgrade in terms of power level. I'm excited to see if Lockjaw feels playable with the multiple times per turn again. I also think it's really great that Second Dinner chose to make this change during a week where Beta Ray Bill is currently inside of Spotlight caches, because this way, if Lockjaw ends up being playable in a Thor's deck again, one of the key cards in that archetype is accessible for players to grab with their Spotlight keys. Our last 4 buffs are all single point power increases, starting with Hydra Bob going to a 1/5. While I think Hydra Bob was playable at 1/4 and is definitely better at 1/5, I also don't expect him to become a must-have card for anyone. His effect is a little bit chaotic, and there's a ton of other 1/5s in the game with varying other drawbacks that you can mitigate in different ways. That being said, as something of a Cerebro enjoyer myself, Cerebro 5 is an archetype that's felt like it's one more cheap card away from really being a metagame powerhouse for some time, and perhaps Hydra Bob getting a 5th point of power could be exactly that. I'm excited to experiment with Black Swan Cerebro 5 here soon. Our next buff has Werewolf By Night creeping back up to his release stat line, getting a +1 up to a 3/2. I'm not surprised to see this happen. I think Second Dinner could probably rip the band-aid all the way off and put it back up to a 3/3 again to start. They acknowledge that Werewolves By Night has not been dominating since they brought it back to a 3-cost, and they're putting a little bit of power back into his kit yet again to see if they can help with this poor pup's performance. Up next, we have Hitmonkey going from a base 3/2 up to a base 3/3. This is another personal favorite of mine, and one that I'm honestly a little bit surprised to see get a buff. I've been playing Hitmonkey in a variety of shells that had already felt powerful, and I'm excited to get another point on them, pushing them up even further. Second Dinner does note that they felt the card has been struggling for a little bit now, so perhaps my personal success with the card was atypical. At any rate, I am excited to get these animals with guns popping off again in some games of Marvel Snap. Finally, we have Sauron gaining another point of power up to a 3/4 now. Second Dinner notes that while the Shuri Red Skull deck was powerful once upon a time in Marvel Snap, the metagame has moved past them in a number of ways. They want to directly inject more points of power into this deck's kit. They view Shuri as one of the more accessible decks that early series players have access to, which makes sense. It's one of the few fully powered decks that, generally speaking, doesn't want any series 4 or 5 cards, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that Second Dinner is paying careful attention to these archetypes that are more accessible to newer players. I think this point to Sauron seems relatively free, and I'm glad to see them give it to him. Overall, I absolutely love this over-the-air update. I think they buffed a number of underplayed cards that look fun to explore with again, including a number of my own personal favorites. I also like that they didn't cave to a number of people who were complaining loudly about Ahrim by adjusting that card directly, and instead chose to just take a few points of power off the top from some of the more powerful cards in the more popular builds. It's always kind of validating to me as a player when Second Dinner pulls back that curtain on their internal data and they share with us metrics that are indicative of my experience that's been running counter to other people who have been shouting like the sky is falling about Ahrim. Truly, I think if you are not finding decks that are good into what the Ahrim decks are doing, it just means you are not innovating or trying nearly enough, and Second Dinner seems to agree. At any rate, if you enjoyed my breakdown on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because I'll have lots of Marvel Snap updates like my upcoming best decks roundup after the dust from this OTA settles a little bit on Saturday morning.